Play the piano, you? That should be fun, the rich man sneered, his voice slicing through the golden silence of the ballroom. But the night didn't start that way. The Regency Grand Hotel ballroom glowed with a golden shimmer. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, casting reflections across the marble floors. Laughter echoed against the tall arches as men in crisp tuxedos toasted success and women in glittering gowns danced between gossip and glamour. It was a night of wealth, of power, and of showing off. Among the elite moved someone who wasn't invited. Her name was Amara. She wore a plain black and white uniform, not satin, not silk, but cotton and polyester. A white apron was tied tightly around her waist, and a silver tray in her hand trembled ever so slightly every time she passed the elite. Amara was not one of them. She was a waitress. And for most people in that room, that's all they thought she would ever be. But they didn't know that just 10 years ago, Amara was a child prodigy. At only 9, she had won regional piano championships. At 11, she was invited to perform at a state concert. Her hands had once graced the same keys as Grammy-winning musicians. Until life changed. Her father passed away suddenly in a car crash. Her mother, unable to carry the burden alone, fell sick. Medical bills piled up. The piano lessons stopped. The grand piano at home was sold. By age 15, Amara was working late shifts to keep food on the table. The music inside her, it never died, but it had to go quiet. Still, every time she saw a piano, something in her heart stirred, a flame flickered. Tonight, she hadn't expected to feel it again, but there it was, the piano. It sat at the center of the ballroom like royalty, polished black, glowing under chandelier light. No one had played it yet. It was reserved for the evening's highlight performer. Someone the rich guests were waiting for? As Amara walked past it for the third time, tray balanced on one hand, she couldn't help but glance at it again. Her fingers curled slightly as if they missed the feeling of ivory keys. And that's when he saw her, Mr. Whitmore. He was tall, silver-haired, and dressed in a tuxedo that probably cost more than Amara's rent for the entire year. He stood with other powerful men, sipping brandy, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. But when his eyes caught Amara staring at the piano, he paused, a little smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. To him, it was amusing, a black waitress daring to admire something meant for the elite. Something she had no business touching. He leaned to his friend and whispered, "Look at her. Think she can play?" His friend chuckled. "Maybe." "She can clean it," he joked. They both laughed. Amara didn't hear it, but she felt it. She had grown used to that kind of energy, the way people looked at her like she was invisible. Or worse, like she didn't belong. Still, she continued working, her face calm, her pace steady. She passed champagne glasses, cleared empty plates, smiled at guests who never looked her in the eyes. But her gaze drifted to the piano again, just for a second. This time, Mr. Whitmore noticed her expression. It wasn't one of envy, it was familiarity. That unsettled him. The idea that someone like her, in that uniform, in that skin, could possibly belong to something as sophisticated as classical music, that was ridiculous. At least to him. So he decided he would prove it. Publicly, the night carried on. Speeches were made, deals were toasted, and then, just before dessert was to be served, Mr. Whitmore stood, clinking his fork against his glass. The room went quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, with a booming voice full of confidence, "we've celebrated business, we've celebrated wealth. But how about a little entertainment?" A few people clapped lightly. He turned to the staff area and pointed right at Amara. "You," he said, smiling widely. "Come here." Amara looked around. She thought he meant someone else. "You?" "Yes, the young lady with the tray. Come." Slowly, she approached, unsure of what was happening. "You looked awfully interested in that piano earlier," he said with a mocking tone. "Would you do kind enough to give us a little tune?" People chuckled. One woman whispered, "Is he serious?" Mr. Whitmore added with a smirk, "Let's see if our talented waitress can strike more than just silverware." The laughter grew. Amara froze. She wanted to disappear. Every part of her said no. But deep inside, a fire had been waiting for this moment. She looked at the piano, then looked back at him. Without a word, she walked to the instrument. The ballroom fell completely silent. No one expected what would happen next. The ballroom was silent. Not the kind of silence that felt peaceful, but the sharp, heavy silence right before someone is humiliated. Amara stood at the piano, her fingers just inches above the keys. Her heart was pounding in her chest like a war drum. She could feel the weight of every stare, the wealthy guests. The camera phone slowly being raised, the disbelief, the laughter barely held back. She didn't belong here, at least not in their eyes, but something inside her refused to walk away. Behind her, Mr. Whitmore took a sip of his brandy and leaned back with a smug expression, like he was watching a circus act he himself had orchestrated. "Go on," he said. We're all waiting." A few chuckles rippled through the room. One woman whispered to her husband. She embarrassed herself. Amara swallowed hard. For a brief moment, the trauma of every insult, every closed door, every "you'll never be good enough" echoed in her mind. But then she remembered. She remembered her father's face, sitting on that old wooden stool in their living room as he watched her practice for hours. She remembered how her mother used to hum softly in the kitchen while she played. She remembered her childhood, the competitions, the applause, the joy. And suddenly the fear began to melt. Her eyes closed. She took a deep breath. And then her fingers moved. The first notes came soft and slow. A simple melody. Her hands glided across the keys like they were reuniting with an old friend. The crowd stayed silent, though now for a different reason. She wasn't fumbling. She wasn't pretending. She was playing. Really playing. From classical to jazz, her fingers moved with power and grace, switching tempos, building momentum, adding layers. The music wasn't just beautiful, it was alive. It told a story, her story. The room shifted, laughter faded. Smirks disappeared, heads turned. And in the back, Mr. Whitmore's smug expression slowly dropped. He leaned forward now, confused, almost angry, not at her, but at himself. He had tried to humiliate her, he had expected failure, but what he got instead was brilliance, pure, raw brilliance. People around the room began to look at each other with widened eyes. One man whispered, "My God, she's incredible." A woman near the front covered her mouth as tears formed in her eyes. The pianist they had paid to perform that evening, a professional, stood frozen at the edge of the room, stunned. Even he knew this was no fluke, this was talent. And it was undeniable. The more Amara played, the more confidence surged through her veins. She was no longer a waitress in a stiff uniform. She was an artist, a storyteller, a soul finally allowed to speak. The piano roared under her command. Asterisk, she ended the piece not with a loud finale, but with a whisper, a soft, trembling note that hung in the air like smoke. And then, silence, again. But this time, it was sacred. No one moved. And then, applause? Not polite, not forced, but thunderous, honest applause. Some guests stood, others clapped with tears in their eyes. People who hadn't even made eye contact with her earlier were now cheering, filming, whispering to each other. Who is she? Amara stood up slowly, her chest rising and falling with breath she didn't realize she had been holding. And Mr. Whitmore? He couldn't even look at her. He sat there, silent, pale, humiliated. The room he once controlled now admired the very person he tried to mock. The moment was no longer his, it belonged to her. Amara gave a small bow, looked toward the kitchen where her fellow waitstaff stood frozen in disbelief, and smiled. She didn't say a word, because the music had already said everything. The applause still echoed through the ballroom like thunder rolling across a sky that had just been cracked open. Amara stepped away from the piano slowly, the soft click of her shoes the only sound breaking the stunned silence that followed her performance. Some people were still frozen, hands paused mid-clap, as if trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. Others stood fully, clapping as though they'd been waiting their whole lives to cheer for someone, like her, someone they hadn't known they needed. And then, as if shaking off a spell, the room burst into full standing ovation. Amara didn't look for praise. She had already walked past that need years ago. This wasn't about proving something to them. It was about freeing something in herself. Something that had been locked away by hardship, poverty, and judgment. Something that had finally been heard again. People rushed to her, guests in pearls and tuxedos, trying to shake her hand, ask her name, offer her cards and compliments. One man with white gloves and slicked back hair leaned in and said, "Miss, that was world class? Are you signed to anyone?" Amara gave a soft smile and stepped back. She wasn't ready for their sudden interest. Not yet. Where was all this energy when she was clearing their plates? From the corner, a young girl about 10 years old, the daughter of one of the guests, slowly approached her with wide, sparkling eyes. She held a napkin in one hand and nervously stretched it out. Can I have your autograph?" the girl asked shyly. Amara's heart warmed. She knelt, signed it with her name, and whispered, "You can play too, you know. Just don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Meanwhile, Mr. Whitmore had not moved from his seat. His glass sat untouched. His face, once smug and proud, now looked pale and embarrassed. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Not because he didn't have words, but because he had nothing meaningful to say. Everything he'd believed about status, class, race, and ability had been shattered in one unexpected performance. His plan had backfired in the most poetic way. He hadn't humiliated her. She had humbled him. His friends, once laughing with him, now looked elsewhere, embarrassed to be associated with his cruel gain. One of them gave a half-hearted pat on his back before walking away. Another just shook his head, But Amara? She didn't even glance at him. Not out of spite, but because he didn't matter anymore. The man who once commanded the room now sat invisible. A few feet away, the event's official pianist, a respected performer who had been booked for the night, approached Amara with disbelief on his face. "I was scheduled to play," he said softly, "but after that, I don't think I can follow you." That was more than music. That was a message, Amara nodded. "Music was my first language," she said. "Life just didn't let me speak it for a while." He placed a hand over his heart and gave a slight bow. That moment, captured on multiple phones and cameras, would go viral before midnight. By the next morning, Amara's performance would be all over social media. Waitress shocks ballroom with genius piano skills, mocked by Billionaire. But her music silenced them all. Thousands of people would comment, share, and tag music labels and scholarship programs. Everyone wanted to know, who is Amara? But in that moment, away from the internet, away from the cameras, Amara quietly walked back through the kitchen doors where the other waiters stood in disbelief. Her coworker Lise whispered, "You just changed everything." She looked down at her apron, wiped her hands, and said gently, "No, I just remembered who I was." The night ended, but the story had only just begun. Amara changed back into her coat in the staff locker room, tying her curly braids into a loose bun. Her shift had technically ended hours ago, but she lingered behind in the quiet, still trying to process what had just happened. It didn't feel real, not the applause, not the ovation. Not the strangers asking for her name like she was somebody important. She was still wearing a waiter's name tag. But her soul felt like it had shed a decade of silence. As she walked out of the hotel through the back entrance, the cool night air kissed her cheeks. Her phone buzzed, and buzzed again. And again. She glanced down, hundreds of notifications. Someone had posted a clip of her performance online, just 90 seconds of her playing, but that 90 seconds had exploded. The caption read, "Rich man tries to mock waitress, but she leaves him and the whole room speechless." Asterisk comments were flooding in by the minute. "She's incredible. I got chills. This is what raw talent looks like. Give her a record deal now? Who is she? Does anyone know her name?" By morning, her clip had hit 2 million views. By noon, it had crossed 10 million. The story had become a symbol, not just of musical brilliance, but of underdog resilience, of dignity, of silent strength. TV shows wanted interviews. Music schools offered full scholarships. Even celebrities reposted the video. But none of that mattered as much as the moment that came 2 days later. Amara stood in front of a dusty, upright piano in her old community center, the same place where she had once taught kids for free when she had the time, a little girl. With thick glasses and shy hands sat next to her on the bench. "Do you think I can play like you?" she asked. Amara smiled and nodded. "I think you already can. You just need someone to believe in you." The truth was, Amara had spent most of her life being overlooked, judged by the way she dressed, dismissed by where she worked. And now, suddenly, the world had turned its eyes toward her. But Amara didn't care about fame. She cared about music. She cared about representation. She cared about healing. And now, she finally had a platform to do all three. Meanwhile, back at the Regency Grand Hotel, the story still floated like smoke among the wealthy. Guests whispered about it. Waiters told new hires, "Did you hear what happened in this ballroom last week? Mr. Whitmore? He kept a low profile. His reputation had taken a hit." Sponsors pulled out of his upcoming gala. Social media users unearthed his history of arrogant behavior. One viral comment read, "You judged her for wearing an apron, but she had more class than your whole table." He never apologized publicly. But honestly, Amara didn't need him to. Because life had already delivered the justice he couldn't. A month later, Amara walked onto a real concert stage, not a ballroom. Not a side gig, but a sold-out theater filled with people who came just to hear her play. As the lights dimmed and the crowd settled, she took her seat at the piano. She looked out at the audience and said, "Greater than this performance is for every child who was told their dreams don't fit where they come from. And for every grown-up who forgot that they still have something extraordinary inside them." Then she played, not to prove anything, but to remind the world that talent knows no uniform, no race, and no price tag. Never judge a person by their job or their silence, because sometimes behind the quietest soul is the loudest brilliance. If you believe in hidden talent and second chances, hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe for more inspiring moments. Description: a wealthy man thought it would be funny to humiliate a black waitress by forcing her to play piano in front of a rich crowd. But what happened next left the entire ballroom stunned. What started as mockery turned into a moment of pure brilliance that no one expected. This emotional and powerful story proves that talent knows no race, no status, and no uniform. Get ready for an inspiring journey that shows how one woman turned humiliation into a standing ovation and changed her life forever. Based on true experiences of discrimination and resilience. This story will leave you speechless. If you believe in second chances and hidden genius, like, comment, and subscribe.